Hey everybody, wanted to make a video. I had somebody ask me in the comments of one of my other videos about my car that they were interested. They happened to notice that I had coilovers on the front of this, and I figured and they wanted to know some information about how I did that. So just in case this is the first video of mine you've ever seen, first off, I apologize because on this video I am going to attempt possibly some video editing. I try to avoid video editing kind of like I try to avoid a machine shop. So just two things I tend to not spend a lot of time doing or spending money on. But anyway, I am going to roll in or try to roll in some pictures of back whenever I did this project, the coilover part of it. But in case this is the first video of mine you've seen, this is my 1984 Corvette. I named her Elva. And I LS swapped it. It's got a 4L80E transmission, Dana 44 rear end. But this video is about that right there. So, little backstory on why this came to be, why I had coilovers in here. And I'll put it up in the air, and I'll put the lift up in the air so you can see the underside of it here in just a minute. But the idea was, originally I had no intention on doing coilovers. I thought coilovers were really cool, and I wanted them, but that wasn't in the plans. What was is I thought, well, okay, I never liked how high the car sat. Obviously, it would be easier to see if it had the hood on it. I never liked how far the car sat up, so I wanted to lower it. So I can't remember if I got it from Mid-America or Eckler's or wherever it was, and I got a lowering kit. And it's the one that had the little lowering wedges in the front for the monoleaf spring, and then it came with the longer bolts in the back. So I installed the kit on the back, and you can see, you know, it sat down. It's still pretty high up because my driveway sucks. My driveway is horrible. It's a 1/4 mile long of suck. So I need some ground clearance or I'll never make it out of my own driveway. But believe it or not, that is substantially lower than stock. And the nice thing is I evened it out left to right. These early C4s, I think 84 through 86 especially, had a problem that the monoleaf spring in the back was actually warped from the factory from whatever heat treating process they put that fiberglass spring through. And they would sit uneven. There's actually a memo or a tech bulletin that GM released back in the 80s about it, just that the warranty wouldn't cover it, basically, just to tell customers to go pound salt, that it didn't affect handling or performance of the vehicle. So it always kind of drove me nuts because the passenger side sat up way higher than the driver's side in the back. So I put that lowering kit on to even it out. And whenever I have it up in the air, I'll show you the difference in bolts, what I had to do. So the back end of this car is not coilover. The back end still has, now this is a Z51 car, so it has the heavier springs in it. It still uses a monoleaf in the back. Now I put polyurethane bushings all through the back. I know everybody hates poly bushings. Well, I like them. So then I put Bilstein shocks in the back. Then I did one thing that everyone thinks I'm an idiot for. I put a heavier rear sway bar in the back, not a lighter. And the reason I did that, this is not an autocross car. This is a burnout car. This is a car that puts a smile on my face and I like to kick the ass end sideways and have fun with. And that heavier rear sway bar makes it a little bit easier to kick the rear end sideways. You do have to be careful when you're driving her because of it. But man, does it makes things a whole lot more interesting having that heavier rear sway bar. I know it's minor, but and I can't remember what the millimeter is. I think it's maybe 28 mil or 30 mil. I don't remember. But I put poly bushings on it too. But it definitely stiffened the rear end up enough that it seems so much easier to break the rear end loose and just have some pretty rowdy fun with the car. So I'm pretty happy with that. Again, it's not an autocross car. I'm not trying to pull a G on a skid pad or something like that. It's just for fun, and it really helps the car break loose when I want it to. So on to my dilemma, why I went coilovers on the front. So I lowered the back. And then those of you that have lowered the front end of these cars know that it's much more involved. The back's easy. The front's the hard part. Well, I already had the car LS swapped at that time. Unlike a lot of people, I had to notch my front cross member. Okay, and I'll put it up in the air to show you. And I don't know if you can see. No, you can't see from the front. The front of the oil pan, and it wasn't this motor. It was actually this motor. This is a cammed LS6 that's on the stand. And I'm not going to pull it off. The oil pan that's on this motor is just a regular F-body Camaro oil pan. Okay, so it's the normal swap pan that everybody uses. This motor has an LS3 oil, or LS2, LS3, the C6 Corvette pan on it. And when I put it up in the air, I'll show you why. So let's put it up in the air. It'll take just a minute, and I'm sorry, it's going to be noisy. But what happened was the front of the oil pan wouldn't clear the cross member, or I shouldn't say that. It actually did clear, but it rubbed on the cross member. And it's one of those things where I knew that eventually, being that that oil pan is just cast aluminum, that it probably was going to rub a hole through that oil pan. And I found that out on that motor, right, the one on the stand. I started seeing rub marks on the front of the pan. So whenever I pulled the motor out at one point, I think I was putting in a cam or whatever I was doing, I notched the cross member, okay? Now I had to cut the notch a little differently for this motor because of the C6 pan, but you may be asking, what does that have to do with lowering the car? Well, I'll show you. So the area that you are notching when you do that is the same area that takes up the space that the monoleaf is contained in. So I notched the frame and I put it back together. Everything was fine. Well, then, and you can see here, here's my oil pan, okay? And you can see that space right there. I have welded in a piece of angle, so that way it clears that oil pan. Okay, and I didn't clean up the welds or anything, so it's going to look rough. I used a flux core to do it because it's thin steel and I didn't really care. So it's a little slaggy, but it's all right. It's strong. I welded all the way around it. But here's the problem. If I take a look at the inside, where the monoleaf used to be, you can see that angle steel protruding inside the, now I didn't weld it from the back side at all. That's just the back side of the steel, and it's just basic angle iron, nothing fancy, right? Well, unfortunately for me, that took up all the room I had for the monoleaf. So I tried to put the monoleaf back in with the lowering blocks, and it physically wouldn't fit. And at that point, I'm already invested. I already have it welded. I already am doing it. I already had the LS swap and all that. So I had a problem. It's like, well, what do I do? Well, hang on. I'm gonna lower the lift back down with you on the camera here. So it's gonna be kind of an awkward angle, but I hope you can still hear me. So my thought was, what do I do? Well, really the only option I came up with was I could put coilovers on the front. That would let me still lower the car and not cost a fortune. And I thought it was kind of a cool project. It's like, you know what, coilovers are cool. I always wanted them anyway. Let's go with it. You know, let's do that as an option. Okay, there, I got the lock off. So she's still coming down. So I thought, okay, what are my rules of engagement here? How do I want to tackle this? Well, I looked for kits and I did my research, and early C4s have a problem with coilovers. You can find kits for late C4s. Okay, and the problem is, the reason it's an issue, let me grab my light here so you can see. The reason it's an issue on an early C4 versus not so much of one on a late C4, you can see I have this welded on the top of my shock tower. I added this. This is actually the top of the factory shock tower right here. It is way too narrow to fit the coil of a coilover inside of it. On the later, and I'm not sure what the year cutoff is. I know somebody on there will probably tell me in the comments, but from my understanding of it, it's basically the LT1 style Corvettes have a wider shock tower, and those you can fit a coilover into. But there's a problem there too. And a lot of people that have done coilovers have noticed we got two issues with that. One, that's a really short shock distance. I think you only have 8 inches, or I'd have to double check that. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll roll in some pictures here of mine with some measurements, but and I'll also post part numbers to everything I used in the description too. The coilovers that you can fit on the LT1 style, that bolt or the top of that is going to be a lot lower. So you're losing a lot of suspension travel in doing that. 2, you have a much sharper angle. I mean, just look at the way this sits. Mine is much more straight up and down as opposed to if it was sitting back here. So your angle is a lot greater if you actually did have it that fit inside of the shock tower. So that was 2 issues that you run into in the later model Corvettes. In the early C4s, the problem is you can't fit it. Your only option, if you want a direct bolt in, is Exotic Muscle. They make I think they still make, a real thin coilover that's kind of garbage. It's a junky product. And I didn't want that. I wanted something that was off the shelf. I could go to Summit Racing. I could go to, I mean, I'm an hour and 45 minutes from Summit Racing, in the one in Ohio. So I wanted something I could drive and just get parts off a shelf and work. I'd also heard very good things about QA1. And you can see that's a QA1 shock in there. I don't know if you can see the logo or not. That is not, however, a QA1 spring. That is a, what are they, Hyperco? Yeah, that's a Hyperco spring. But anyway, I thought there was a name. Sorry if I'm moving you around. I'm probably making you sick. There's a name somewhere on the spring. I'm just not finding it. Anyway, so here's what happened. Here's how I did this. I did a build thread on this on the Corvette forum where I took some pictures. However, I did not take a video of me actually doing this. So what I'll do is I'll roll in some of those pictures, or I'll try to. Okay, so if you're not seeing pictures roll in right now, that's because I didn't figure it out on my software. But if you're seeing them there, then you know, some pictures go through. You know, I figured it out. So here's the gist of it, okay? So this top shock tower, this top shock mount, this is actually meant for a dirt track car. Let me get this light back a little bit, and that might help. There we go. This is actually meant for a dirt track car. I'll post some part numbers and things in the description. I figured if it's good enough for a dirt track car, it's good enough for me. I called QA1. I talked to their techs on the phone. They recommended this shock. They said it has rubber bushings instead of bearings. He's like, a street car, that's what you want. He's like, these mounts are going to be fine for what I'm doing. And down at the bottom, I have T-mount adapters. And these are from QA1. They just slide through the bottom of the shock, and it has a bolt hole on each side that bolts right into the factory lower mount. So that was nice and easy. That's right from QA1. They had those in stock at Summit Racing. Nothing special about them. That's a normal mount that they normally keep in stock. So I was all about that. And then this up here is just a crappy grade 3 bolt or grade 2 bolt that came with the shock. This isn't even, I didn't buy this. This came with the shock. It's just you can tell by the dashes on it there. It's just a no grade or whatever. It's definitely not a grade 8 bolt. Or I think, wait, no, I'm sorry. The 3 dashes is a grade 5. So it's a grade 5. I apologize. So anyway, how did I get this on here? Well, obviously, I took the plastic guard off this plastic shield. All had to get unbolted and removed. That's really not that hard. So 2 things have to happen. Well, really 3. First, you have to clearance the shock tower. Because when you drop this down in, it's not going to clear the upper A-arm on an older C4. I've heard the later C4s had A-arms that were longer this way, but on an 84 like this one, definitely not going to clear. So what I had to do is I had to clearance that shock tower. And you can see how I did that. Right, maybe you can see. Let me move the light here to something a little bit better. Okay. So basically, I dropped the shock and spring down in, and I took a die grinder, or well, an air cutoff, and I started chopping. And I got it to where it would fit, okay? And it's not pretty, but it doesn't have to be. It just has to fit, okay? So I did that on that side. Now, originally, I had cut a little bit on this side, and I didn't have to, so I ended up welding it back on. But really, the front is where you have to add your material. And I think it goes, you know, without saying, I did this without the upper A-arm in place. The upper A-arm was removed completely. while I did this. So don't even bother with this in place. Remove your upper A-arm. Leave the lower A-arm, of course. Remove the upper A-arm. Separate the ball joint. Get it out of there. It's going to make your life a whole lot easier having this out of there, okay? So I cut all this material away from the steel here that I needed to get this to fit. Also, whenever I was test fitting, I did it without the spring installed. I had a angle gauge, and it's actually this cheap Harbor Freight one right there that with a magnet on it that I have stuck to the side of my building. I used that on the side of the shock to get the angle that I wanted. Now, what angle do you want? Well, there's a lot of debate on that. I recommend call QA1, talk to them, tell them what your goals are for the car, and they will help you out with an angle. Or right on their website, they have an amazing, it's a PDF that walks you through that process and gives you some tidbits and advice. I'm not going to go into suspension geometry and what would work best for you. You need to research the angle of that shock and what you want, and then you try to shoot for that the best that you can. But just know the angle I got, and I don't remember exactly what it is now, is exactly what the QA1 tech told me would probably work best for me. And I'm very happy with it. Handling-wise, it does anything I ever ask it to do. But again, I'm not auto-crossing the car. The purpose of this car is to do burnouts and be faster than my friends. That's it. It's never going to see any track time. Okay, so your needs may be different than mine. So once I had that clearanced, and I had the shock just sitting, I had it bolted down below on the T-mount, and then I had it sitting here the angle I wanted. I was able to set this top mount in and line everything up and see if, for one, can I even get the angle that I wanted? And I had to grind a little bit more to get it back where I wanted it. Sure enough, I did. So I tacked this into place, and then I pulled the shock back out. Okay, so my problem then is I've weakened this shock tower substantially by chopping metal out of it. So what I did is I welded a whole bunch of metal in. And it's kind of sloppy down here because I did it vertical up and I did it with a stick welder and not a flux core or anything. So it doesn't look pretty, but there's a plate right here and you probably can't see it. But this right here is actually a plate that runs from all the way at the top, all the way to the bottom, and I welded that in. I also welded another one around the back side. So there's a 1-inch wide, quarter-inch thick, or no, not quarter-inch thick, I'm sorry. Yeah, anyway, it's not quite a quarter-inch thick, but it's pretty substantial. I welded it in the back side to give it strength there. And then one thing that you can't see, on the inside, back behind this upper mount, I welded a triangle gusset in. That way to give this shock tower strength so it can't be pushed and bent out this way. So, yes, it took some fabrication. Did it take a long time? Not really. I cut some pieces of metal, I tacked them in, I welded the snot out of them, and then I spray painted it. That was really about it. Once I had the angle that I needed, I just tacked it and then pulled it all apart, welded it, and then put it back together. Now, when I first did that, the spring I originally had in here was a QA1. I used the recommended spring for this shock, okay? And if I remember right, it was a 10-inch long spring. And I think it was right around 500 pound or 450 pounds, something like that. That's what QA1 had recommended. When I used that spring and I put it all together and lowered the car down, it sat up like a monster truck. So I lowered it down as far as it would go. And I mean, I was on the last threads that adjuster had, and it was still setting about a 1/2 inch taller than stock. So I was pissed, right? I was pretty upset. So I pulled it back apart and I didn't know what to do. I knew the fabrication was solid. It was just parts weren't right. I call QA1 again and they tell me those spring recommendations are just a recommendation and they don't know what ride height you will need. So you may need to go with a shorter spring. The problem, what I ran into is I had already beat up the springs. I had chipped them up and scratched them from all the times of dropping them down in there, test fitting. So I couldn't return them, or at least I didn't feel right returning them. So I sold them on eBay as a lightly used spring, even though they had 0 miles on them. And then I went to Summit and I bought these I believe they're 550 pound. I could be wrong, but I'll put the part number up there. 500 or a 550 pound Hyperco spring. And the only reason I didn't go with QA1 on this spring is in an 8-inch, the only spring they had in that weight range was chrome, and it was stupid expensive. And I felt like I was just paying for chrome, and it's something that nobody was going to see anyway. So I went with Hyperco because I'd heard it was a good brand. I don't know for sure. But the tech at Summit said that they were interchangeable with QA1 shocks. It was right in the weight range I needed, and you need to go higher weight range when you go to a shorter shock, and that's all on QA1's website. They break that down. They have a calculator on there that you can calculate what spring rate to use. And I went with it's either a 500 or 550 pound spring, and it sits perfectly in the middle. So the adjuster, when I adjusted this up, we're right in the middle of the travel, maybe a little closer to the bottom, but not by much. I know on camera it's looking like it's closer to the bottom, but really it's not when you consider the top of that adjuster is actually right here. So you're right in the middle of the adjustment on that spring now instead of being buried, and it actually sits pretty low. And I can even it out side to side. I have all the adjustment I ever want. As far as the knob on the shock, I just got the QA1 that had the one knob. I can't remember how many positions it has. I just set it in the middle. I didn't spend any time adjusting it or figuring what I wanted. I just kind of threw it in the middle, and I was like, meh, let's see how it drives. And I drove it, and it was great. I didn't really have any problems with it. This summer, because this engine is about 100 pounds heavier, I may have to make some adjustments or dial it in a little differently, but I maybe not. I don't know. We'll see. But as far as ride quality and stuff, people ask me, does it handle any better than the factory suspension? This is a Z51 car that already had the heavier suspension and was supposed to have the Bilstein shocks on it, even though the previous owner had put cheap Monroes on it. Does it handle better than stock? Probably. I don't know. I don't autocross the car. I do some spirited driving, and let's be real. I just hammer on this thing as a fun toy. It's not a serious race car to me. It's a fun car. It's a very sentimental car to me, and I have a lot of fun with it. And I go fast in it and do stupid stuff in it. But that's about it. I don't race it, but it does seem to handle for my purposes and the things I do with it. Yeah, it does seem to have a little bit better handling. I imagine the 20-year-old dry rotted tires that are on it probably detract more from my handling than anything else. If I actually put good rubber on it, it'd probably handle a whole lot better. I imagine that'd be the single most improvement to handling. But these haven't vanished in a puff of smoke yet. So I'm going to keep a hold of them until I can do so. Because again, that's the purpose of the car. I do burnouts in it and I have fun in it, and that's about it. It puts a smile on my face. So were coilovers worth it? Yeah, I think so. It gives you the adjustability. I'm actually happy that I had the early model C4 to do this, because if you do this the way I did it with the upper shock mounts, you get longer suspension travel. You get a slightly better shock angle than what you would if you had the later model where it's angled back in further. According to the tech at QA1 anyway, he said that'll give better ride quality. So in a street application, in a street car, keep that in mind. In a street car, he said that's a better alternative. Now, again, I don't specialize in suspension geometry or anything like that. This is the first custom suspension I've ever really messed with, and I would definitely say it was a success. Now, if I took this car out and autocrossed it, I'm sure it would fall flat on its face, because that's not its purpose. That's not what it's for. But that's about it. I mean, I welded the snot out of it. Oh, one more thing. Some of these seams, you can see right here, this plate is stock. Okay, so this piece that I'm touching right here is factory. It was just spot welded in. I went through while I was there and I welded I went around and welded it a whole lot better than what it was. I did the same thing over here. This steel here, I welded all this in. you know, and I welded up here too. I welded the shock tower to the frame. So you go through and you weld a whole bunch, shoot it with some spray paint. Before I put the coilovers on it, I did do something that was kind of neat. I was still afraid that I would have too much flex in that steel, or that it wasn't strong enough. And this was just me doubting, I don't know, doubting my welds, doubting fabrication, doubting my design, whatever. So before I put these plastic pieces on, I had that motor in the car at the time. I attached a chain without the shocks being in there. I attached a chain to my upper mounts I welded on, and I lifted the front of the car with that chain. And as I did it, I had a straight edge, the best that I could. I didn't have any belt-driven accessories or anything on it at the time, so I could kind of get one across there. And I had no deflection. I had no flex in those shock mounts whenever I lifted the whole front end of the car. So once I saw that, and I lifted, and I even took measurements to try to see, did I gain any length by actually putting weight on it? And there was nothing I could see on a tape measure that I actually gained length from picking up the car by that shock mount. It didn't stretch or distort or twist in any way. So I was happy with that. I'm like, you know what? If it can lift the weight of the car by that mount, that's good. I don't think I'm going to Dukes of Hazzard this thing and jump it over something. So so far, and I drove it all last summer with these installed, and it did great. You know, it really did fantastic. I can't speak to putting coilovers on the back because I haven't done it. I do know a lot of people have had problems with brackets breaking and how to mount them and things like that. Maybe someday I'll look into it. Oh, shoot. I wanted to show you my rear. I'm sorry. I said I was going to show you my rear lowering bolts and how uneven they were, and I completely forgot. So you're going to sit here and listen to me talk as I put my car back up in the air again. But hey, at least you don't have to watch me like struggle and lay on the ground and crawl under the car. You know, I just get to show off my lift. This very much was like a bucket list kind of thing for me, buying a lift, and I got marks on the side that tell me how far I can lift it for all that one's for my Impala, that's for, I got a Nissan Sentra, and then that's for the Corvette. Tells me how far I can lift it before I hit the ceiling. So it's kind of a low ceiling. And you can obviously tell by the looks of this thing, this is definitely not a commercial garage. This is just the place I go to build hobbies. And we got one more lock. Okay, and then we'll lower her down on the block there. Yep, we're good. Okay, so let me grab the flashlight and I'll show you what I mean by that rear mount. Okay, so you can see this is the one side. This is the lowering bolt that I put through. And like I said, I put new Bilsteins on it. You can see how much is sticking through there in thread. We'll take a look at this side. There is way less sticking through. I haven't cut that bolt or anything. That's just what it took to even out the two sides of the car. To make it so if I hold a tape measure from the floor to the top of the wheel, or I'm sorry, the top of the wheel well, that it was the same on both sides. This was a known issue on these early C4s. If memory serves, I think 84 to 86 was the big culprits in those. I could be wrong on that, but it was a known issue on them, and GM had said, we're not fixing it, just live with it. So what I ended up doing, like I said, I just adjusted it to get it to where it was even on both sides. But that's about it, guys. Maybe someday I'll put coilovers on the back. I don't know. And like I said, this is going to be a video of me, an attempt of me rolling in pictures and things. We'll see how far I get with that. But all right, if you have any questions, hit me up.